Let's talk about something that can feel frustrating, confusing, and deeply personal. Loving someone who is avoidant. When an avoidant loves you, it doesn't look like the grand romantic gestures you see in movies. It's not loud. It's not always clear. And it sure as hell isn't easy to decode. But just because they don't love you in the way you expect doesn't mean they don't love you. When it comes to avoidant individuals, love often doesn't come wrapped in poetic declarations or heartfelt conversations. In fact, the very thing that makes most people feel connected, open verbal expression, is exactly what makes an avoidant feel vulnerable and exposed. For them, saying, "I love you," "I miss you," or "I need you" isn't just difficult, it can feel dangerous. Because behind that difficulty is a deep-rooted fear that vulnerability opens the door to being hurt, controlled, or rejected. And so, instead of using words, they turn to actions. Avoidants show love in indirect ways. You'll see it in how they fix something that's been bothering you around the house without saying a word. You'll see it in the way they check your tire pressure before a long drive or bring you a coffee exactly how you like it, without asking. These are not just nice gestures. They are intentional expressions of care that feel safe for them to give. Because unlike emotional disclosure, but acts of service give them a sense of contribution without the emotional exposure that words would require. The problem is, if you're wired differently, especially if you lean more anxiously attached, you might misread this entirely. You're looking for words. You crave reassurance. You want to talk it out. And when they stay quiet, you assume they're detached or indifferent. But the truth is, they may be speaking to you through action, not avoidance. This creates emotional dissonance in the relationship. One person is shouting in behavior, "I care about you." And the other person is listening for words and hearing silence. That disconnect can lead to misunderstandings, resentment, and emotional confusion. But if you can shift how you interpret their behavior, everything changes. You stop assuming the worst. You start noticing the quiet ways they are trying to meet you halfway, even if it's not the way you expected. Avoidants often believe love should be stable, not chaotic. They fear overwhelming displays of emotion, so they associate emotional intensity with instability. This makes their approach to love more reserved and practical. They may not sit you down for a long emotional conversation, but they might make sure you get home safe every night. They might not tell you they're proud of you, but they'll quietly celebrate your win with you in a way that feels manageable for them. Of course, this doesn't mean you should settle for emotional starvation. You can still advocate for your needs, but it helps to understand the language they're speaking. When avoidants love you, they won't shout it from the rooftops. They'll whisper it in the way they show up consistently, do little things to make your life easier, and try, in their own guarded way, to keep you close while staying emotionally safe themselves. But the key is to stop judging their love by how loudly it's spoken and start listening to how it's shown. Because for avoidants, action is often their most honest love language. One of the most misunderstood behaviors of someone with an avoidant attachment style is their tendency to create distance just when things start to feel good. To the average partner, especially someone who leans anxiously attached, this can feel like abandonment. You think, why would they pull away now, right when things are going well? It seems counterintuitive, but here's the truth. Avoidants don't give you space because they don't care. They give you space because they do. For avoidants, emotional closeness can feel overwhelming, even threatening. When they begin to feel the intensity of connection, their nervous system doesn't interpret it as safety. It interprets it as vulnerability. This is often rooted in early experiences where closeness meant losing autonomy, being criticized, or having to meet the emotional needs of an unpredictable caregiver. So as adults, when they get close to someone they actually care about, it unconsciously reactivates those early fears. That's why love, real love, can feel like pressure to an avoidant. The more emotionally significant the relationship becomes, the more they feel a need to regulate the perceived threat. And how do they do that? By creating distance. They might become quieter. They might stop texting as frequently. They may suddenly seem uninterested or emotionally detached. But this is not always an indication that their feelings are fading. It's often a sign that their emotions are growing and they don't know how to safely manage them. Avoidants use space as a form of self-soothing. Just like someone might take a walk to calm down, avoidants withdraw to find emotional regulation. They need to be alone to sort out their internal chaos because they often struggle to process feelings in real time with another person. When things get too intimate, their instinct is to retreat, not to reject you, but to return to a place of emotional control. What makes this dynamic more complicated is that their partner usually interprets the space as punishment, disinterest, or even the beginning of the end. And that reaction can trigger the avoidant even more, reinforcing the cycle. The more you chase, the more they run. The more you question, the more they shut down. The real turning point in relationships like this is understanding the function of their space. It's not rejection, it's regulation. It doesn't mean they want out, it means they're overwhelmed. And ironically, the best way to get closer to an avoidant is to respect the distance they sometimes need. When they feel they can take space without being punished for it or emotionally guilt-tripped, they begin to feel safer. And when safety increases, so does intimacy, but on their timeline, not yours. So the next time an avoidant you love pulls away, don't rush in to fix it. Don't overanalyze or assume the worst. Instead, recognize that the space they're taking might be the very thing keeping their feelings for you intact. Because in their world, space is not the absence of care. It's how they hold on to it. When it comes to avoidantly attached individuals, grand romantic gestures aren't their strong suit, and emotionally intense conversations may feel like walking through fire. So if you're trying to figure out if an avoidant loves you, don't just look for passion. Don't just look for poetic declarations or intense closeness. Instead, pay attention to something far more telling: consistency. Avoidants aren't known for their emotional availability, but they are often creatures of habit. And when they care about you, one of the ways they show that care is by keeping a steady presence in your life, even if it's subtle. Maybe it's the regular "good morning" text. Maybe it's the way they always check in when you're not feeling well, or how they remember the little details you told them weeks ago and make sure to follow up. It may not seem like much on the surface, but to an avoidant, consistency is vulnerability in disguise. Because here's the thing: avoidance isn't a lack of feeling. It's a defensive pattern designed to manage emotional risk. These individuals deeply fear rejection, engulfment, or losing their independence, so they guard their emotions behind distance. But even in that guarded space, if they're still reaching out, still showing up in small ways, still participating in the rhythm of your life, that's a clue. It means you matter to them, even if they can't say it outright. The brain wants to latch onto intensity as proof of love, passion, conflict, dramatic declarations. But intensity can be misleading. It's consistency that tells you whether a relationship is grounded in something real. With avoidance, their version of consistency may not look like what you're used to. It might be quiet, understated, easy to miss if you're expecting fireworks, but it's often more honest than words they don't know how to say. For an avoidant to keep showing up, it means they've evaluated the emotional risk and decided you're worth it. That "good night" message, that random meme they sent you, that offer to help you with something even though they hate being needed. Those are acts of connection. They're reminders that they're still in this with you, even if it doesn't look like the fairy tales we grew up watching. And here's what's powerful: when you stop chasing the performance of love and start observing the patterns, you regain your emotional clarity. You stop feeling anxious when they aren't overly expressive because you recognize the deeper signal: reliability. And that's gold in any relationship, but especially with someone who struggles to feel safe in closeness. So don't underestimate the power of small, consistent efforts. With avoidants, love often slips through the cracks between the words they don't say, but it shows up in the steadiness of their actions. Their love doesn't yell, it whispers. And if you learn to listen to the quiet rhythm of their consistency, you'll hear it loud and clear. When an avoidantly attached person starts to genuinely love you, something powerful happens beneath the surface. But it's easy to miss because it doesn't come in the form of big promises or sweeping gestures. It doesn't look like sudden emotional openness or a dramatic, "I'll change for you." No, when an avoidant loves you, they often start trying to be better, quietly. Avoidants aren't naturally wired to confront their emotional world head on. They've learned to survive by keeping feelings at a distance, not by diving into self-reflection or vulnerability. So the moment they begin to care deeply about someone, their system enters unfamiliar territory. Love triggers discomfort, fear, and often a deep sense of inadequacy. But here's the catch: if the bond is strong enough, they won't just run from it. Sometimes they'll start doing the inner work, but silently. This might mean they begin setting boundaries with others to reduce chaos in their life. They might start going to therapy, reading about attachment styles, or working on their emotional regulation. You won't hear about it, though. They won't announce, "I'm trying to be more emotionally available." That level of exposure feels too raw, too vulnerable. But you'll see clues in how they start showing up differently. Maybe they're more present when they're with you. Maybe they pull away less often. Or when they do, they come back with more awareness. Maybe they finally listen without shutting down or trying to fix you. What's happening here is quiet evolution, and it's motivated not by pressure, but by care. When an avoidant starts to love someone, they begin to sense the limits of their old coping strategies. They realize that if they keep defaulting to emotional distance, they'll lose what matters to them. That realization doesn't necessarily make them rush toward intimacy, but it does spark something, a desire to grow. The key is they do it in silence because vulnerability feels risky. Declaring change sets expectations. It invites scrutiny. And for someone whose whole attachment strategy revolves around self-protection, even saying, "I'm trying," feels exposing. But that doesn't mean the effort isn't happening. It just means it's happening in a way that feels safer to them through actions, not words. And that's why your job isn't to demand proof of progress. It's to look for subtle shifts. Notice the effort, not just the expression. Recognize that the avoidant in your life may be learning how to love in a language they were never taught. And that learning process is often quiet, clumsy, and private. Real change, especially for an avoidant, doesn't always come with fanfare. But when they start doing better, even a little bit, without expecting praise or attention, that's love in motion. And sometimes the loudest declaration of love is the choice to grow, silently, steadily, and without being asked. When an avoidantly attached person truly loves you, they often find themselves in a battle between two powerful forces: their deep emotional connection to you and their instinct to protect both of you from the chaos they fear they might create. One of the least understood, but most significant behaviors they exhibit is pulling back, not because they don't care, but because they care so much, they're afraid they'll mess it up. In other words, they don't just protect themselves from intimacy. They try to protect you and the relationship from themselves. To someone on the outside, it might look like distance, detachment, or even rejection. But underneath that silence or that sudden withdrawal is often a hidden motive. They don't want to lash out. They don't want to say something they can't take back. They don't want to suffocate the relationship with their own inner conflict. So they do the only thing they've ever known how to do when emotions run high. They retreat. This isn't healthy communication. It's not emotional maturity, but it is, in its own backwards way, an attempt at love. Avoidants often weren't taught how to co-regulate in relationships. They learned that intense emotions, especially their own, are dangerous, shameful, or out of control. So rather than explode, they shut down. Rather than risk emotional damage, they put distance between you and their chaos. That pause they take, that space they create when things feel too intense, it's often them trying not to bring their unresolved trauma into the dynamic. And that's hard to grasp if you're wired for connection and closeness. You may interpret their silence as indifference or punishment. But in many cases, it's the avoidant's last-ditch effort to not ruin what they're trying to preserve. It's important to understand this behavior not as ideal, but as revealing. It shows that they're aware, on some level, of the impact they can have. It shows that even in their withdrawal, there's an acknowledgement. I might cause harm if I stay while I'm dysregulated. They may not say it that way. They may not even consciously think it. But the pattern is there. An emotional fire alarm going off in their system that says, back up before you burn this down. And ironically, the avoidance way of loving often looks like leaving. Not forever, but long enough for their nervous system to settle. They protect the relationship by retreating, hoping time and space will help them come back to you in a calmer, more collected state. It's flawed, it's frustrating, and it often creates more confusion than clarity. But it's also real. So if you're on the receiving end of this behavior, don't internalize it as rejection. See it for what it is, a wounded person trying to avoid hurting, the one thing they don't want to lose. They may not know how to say, I love you, and I'm afraid I'll break this. But sometimes, that's exactly what their silence is screaming. Avoidantly attached individuals are often described as cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. But the truth is, what looks like indifference on the outside is often just a well-armored heart that learned early on to survive by staying guarded. And here's what many people don't realize: when an avoidant actually loves you, that armor doesn't fall off in one dramatic moment. It softens slowly, quietly, and in ways so subtle that you might miss them if you're only looking for grand declarations. Love makes avoidance uncomfortable. That's just the reality. It triggers their deepest fears, the fear of being consumed, of losing control, of being seen in all their emotional vulnerability. So what do? They keep their walls up. They stay in control. They manage the connection by keeping it at a safe distance until something starts to shift. Not because you push, not because you plead, but because your consistency, your calm presence, and your boundaries begin to create an environment that doesn't feel threatening. And when love doesn't feel like danger, something magical happens. Their guard begins to soften. This softening doesn't come with big romantic speeches. It might look like them remembering a small detail you mentioned weeks ago. It might be them checking in when you're having a hard day. It could be a quiet gesture, like sharing a personal story they've never told anyone, or making an effort to include you in a part of their world they usually keep private. These moments aren't loud, but they're meaningful. They're little cracks in the wall, little signs that they're letting you in. Not all at once, but in the only way they know how, gradually. Avoidants are slow to trust, not just others, but themselves. They don't fully trust their own emotions, and they often fear that closeness will overwhelm or destabilize them. But when the relationship feels safe, when it's not filled with pressure or chaos, their nervous system begins to relax, and in that safety, they begin to connect. You may notice they start showing up more consistently. They may initiate contact more. They may start being a bit more present, a bit more emotionally available, even if it's just in moments. It's crucial not to mistake this softening for permanent change. The old defenses still exist. The wall might go back up in times of stress or conflict. But what matters is that over time, their capacity for connection expands if the relationship remains healthy and if they feel emotionally secure. You can't force this process. You can't demand it. But when you understand that love is scary for someone who's learned to protect themselves at all costs, you start to see the small steps for what they are: monumental acts of courage. Because for an avoidant, letting someone in is not easy. So when their guard begins to lower, inch by inch, moment by moment, it's not just a sign of love. It's a sign of transformation.